I see I'm on mute again, so I'll just do my introductions again. Good afternoon, everyone, and a very warm welcome to today's Water Security Africa webinar from pit to plant, rehabilitation and reuse strategies. All right. So my name is Sanyoka, Program Director for Water Security Africa, and I'll be moderating today's discussion. It's wonderful to have so many of you joining us online from across South Africa and beyond. Before we begin, a quick housekeeping note. Please feel free to share your questions or comments in the chat at any time during the discussion. Really want this to be an interactive discussion, so don't hesitate to get involved. I'll be keeping an eye out on the chat to bring your questions to the conversation towards the end of the hour. Mine water management sits at the intersection of industrial extraction, environmental restoration, and sustainable reuse. As we know, mining operations across Africa often generate large volumes of contaminated water, and how we choose to manage, rehabilitate, and reuse the water has enormous implications for the ecosystem, communities, and the broader industrial economy. Today's session looks at how we can turn mine water into a liability into an asset, exploring scalable rehabilitation and reuse strategies that bridge the gap between mining and manufacturing. We'll hear about innovations in treatment technologies, catchment restoration projects, and collaborative models aligned with the Department of Water and Sanitation and other regulatory bodies. Over the next hour, we'll unpack how these strategies can reduce environmental risk, enhance water security, and support the ESG goals, while also contributing to sustainable industrial growth. I'm joined today by two leading voices in this space, Mr. Koos Vivier, Managing Director at RTCM Consulting Services, and Dr. Rembu Magoba, the Water Center Manager at CSIR. So I would like to start in terms of introductions with Dr. Koos Vivier to introduce us where he's from and what he does at RTCM Consulting Services. Good afternoon, Dr. Koos. Lovely to have you today.
Good afternoon, Yolisa. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm a hydrogeologist by training, and I'm involved with mine water management, mine water solutions, and mine closure studies for more than 30 years. I'm at Artesian Consulting, where I'm a director.
Thank you so much, Dr. Koos. Lovely to have you this afternoon. Secondly, Dr. Rembu, would you mind introducing us and the work that you do at CSIR? You're on mute.
Good afternoon, Yoli. Sorry about that. And good afternoon to all the delegates in this conference. I am Rembu Magoba, currently a water center manager at CSIR, where we deal with the issues related to water development or water and wastewater treatment and overall water resource management. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining us this afternoon. To begin with, could you each one of you share your perspectives on the most pressing challenges facing mine water management today and how your experience has shaped the approach to turning these challenges into opportunities for sustainable resources? Perhaps, Dr. Rembu, if you'd like to start.
In this space, I would say the most pressing issue that we are dealing with currently is poor AMD treatment or acid mine drainage management. So the lack of proper management of acid mine drainage, especially in the abandoned mine, remains a very critical issue that we are faced with. You can also look at the lack of government or private funded initiatives currently to address the same challenges, where we can have clear objectives and clear timelines to address such a challenge. However, this also provides an opportunity for technology developers to come up with the acid mine drainage treatment technology that can also include valorization of the byproduct.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Dr. Rembu. Dr. Koos, is what your response to that question, please?
Yeah, so in our experience, the pressure on water resources, specifically on catchment level, is increasing as water is a limited resource and population is growing, not only in South Africa, but we also experience it in the rest of Africa. And there's this competition of specifically water resources. However, there's also great opportunities. for new technologies such as renewable energy coupled with water treatment, not only from an operational mining perspectives, but also beyond closure towards a regeneration view where water could be conserved and water minimization options be implemented so that there's actually positive socioeconomic benefits from these. Mines do not have to wait to turn these into opportunities, and then the implementation of real-time monitoring systems can result in much more effective mine water management and minimization of waste generation.
Thank you so much, gentlemen. I would like to then first direct a specific question to Dr. Rembo. So, drawing on your research at CSIR, Dr. Rembo, and your experience leading water innovation across municipal and national projects, how would you describe the current state of the mine water management in South Africa, specifically, and where the biggest gaps between policy and on the ground implementation?
Very, very interesting question, Yolisa. The current state of mine water management in South Africa is worrisome, with so many abandoned mines that are contributing to large volume of untreated acid mine drainage. As a country, we should be very much concerned. The poor enforcement regarding the closure and the restoration of mining site is a critical issue that is facing the country. And when one look at it, there is also a lack of targeted groundwater management program in such affected areas so that we can eliminate such a critical problem that we're dealing with.
Amazing. And then with you, Dr. Gerses, to draw the question to you, with your specific expertise in mine water and hydrological assessments, what are the biggest opportunities for alternative water supply solutions like desalination, recycling, and artificial groundwater recharge in mine water management?
Yeah, so new water treatment technologies that specifically involve bioengineering and nanotechnology, coupled with sustainable renewable energy, is very promising, specifically in denitrification, where you use microbes to degrade water that's got high nitrate loads, or alternatively to use that water in the agricultural industry. Also, sustainable water treatment technologies in the form of artificial constructed designed wetlands that can continue to improve water quality, not only during the operational phase, but also during the post-closure mine phases. And there's a specific reference to pit lakes. Yes, a number of the pit lakes is not usable with untreated water post-closure, but in some cases the pit lakes can be designed so that there's dynamic through flow to prevent stagnation. And this, where dynamic and integrated modeling approaches comes in, where quantification of both mine water quantity and quality at the same time, and not only for the operational phase, but for the long-term post-closure phase comes in through an integrated approach to arrive at sustainable post-closure water quality standards. And there it's really important to integrate the mine design, the closure designs with the engineered interventions, not to only focus on the short term, but also on the long term post-closure phases. And some mining sites have already been transformed and regenerated to serve as water resources. In the Northern Cape, there's good examples of excess mine water that's pumped into the Val Gamagara scheme that serve a number of communities and more than 150 Kalahari farms. On top of that, we will have to look at concepts such as artificial recharge of groundwater to enhance the water resources, specifically in areas where there's high evaporation losses. So in that sense, the modeling techniques and the quantification methodologies allows for this to be optimized.
Wow, that was really some interesting points, especially around the pit to lakes and post exposure, around it being a modeling approaches that the industry is currently embarking on, with the key example that you used, Dr. Course, within the Northern Cape regarding the access waters. So that's quite interesting. Moving over to you, Dr. Rembu, CSIR develops fit for purpose technologies for water treatment and reuse, as Dr. Course briefly touched on in the earlier question. So, in CSIR, which recent innovations do you believe could most effectively transform contaminated mine water into a valuable resource for industry or communities?
At CSIR, we are working on a technology that we called AMD treatment technology, or acid mine drainage treatment technology. This technology incorporates circular economy. By that, I mean valorization of minerals that are available in the mine water to generate a secondary income stream. Because if we continue to look at mine water as just a waste, we will struggle to attract investment in terms of funding required to treat such a problematic acid mine drainage. So this technology is intended to attract investors, whether public or private, so that they are also able to recover the cost that they've incurred as part of this treatment. And again, we believe that this technology will indirectly encourage the mining companies to adopt it so that they are able to reduce the cost associated with treating their own AMD. So I'm not going to dwell much into other aspects that have been already raised by my colleague, Dr. Kwas, regarding the advantages of treated mine water associated with the irrigation and so on. I think that is a very valid point that you raised, and I fully support that.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Dr. Rembrandt. It's quite interesting, the latest incentives that's coming up from the CSIR Center regarding AMD technologies, and how mining companies and any agencies that are involving within mine water can hopefully adopt this particular strategy. So there was a mention on a particular case study and the advancements that are happening within the Northern Cape that you touched on, Dr. Kors, regarding access water. So just to direct the question to you, Dr. Kors, can you share a specific project where your analytical mine water balance modeling led to successful closed loop innovations, and what are the key lessons learned throughout that?
Yeah, so by integrating the site-wide mine water balance analysis and modeling, not only through the mine but through the catchment, that has led to the identification of sustainable water use volumes where we were able to significantly reduce mine water consumption, both by installing water conservation technologies such as filter presses, or by minimizing evaporation areas. And one could save up to 20% of mine water consumption through optimization of water losses. Also, by understanding the differentiation between different areas where water come into contact with mine surfaces, where contamination potential exists, if that water can be captured prior to making contact with the mine, actual mine surfaces, that water can be abstracted prior to reaching the mine voids, and then you don't have to treat it at the same level as contact water, and yet that water can actually be used for regional water supply schemes. I'm referring to another but a different project in the Northern Cape where the client has to dewater a flooded mine pit, and afterwards they would generate surplus water. The water is fairly clean, it's dolomitic water, and Sedibeng water, which is now Bloem water, is highly interested in taking on the surplus mine water, not only for the life of mine, but they're also interested to own and operate that area as a water supply facility post-closure. And that's got significant socioeconomic benefits. Another example I can cite is actually related to the mine closures. I'm not sure if everybody is aware about this, or is that the oyster mushrooms produced in Kimberley, it was identified that underground tunnels are ideal areas to grow mushrooms, and there's a sustainable oyster farming business that emanated from that.
Amazing. And I actually want to touch on, and we'll touch on that a bit later, regarding how the community now is coming to effect regarding this particular case study that you touch on, Dr. Quist. Moving on to you, Dr. Rembu. So based on your experience with nature-based solutions and ecosystem restorations, how can rehabilitation projects better integrate with industrial water reuse objectives? In addition, from like socioeconomic perspective, how can rehabilitated mine water systems contribute to community resilience and local development beyond merely meeting compliance standards?
Thank you very much, Yodi. Nature-based solutions are the way to go currently. Due to limited financial resources in the country, I think it is very much important to consider or to start considering such cheaper and effective solution such as FICO or phytoremediation. This is a technology that makes use of plants or algae to treat wastewater. So such technology does exist in the country, and it has been proven to work very well in various areas. At CSIR, we have implemented a phytoremediation technology in Mossel Bay municipality, and also in the northern part of the country in an area called Mutatema. And we were testing if this technology can work in different weather conditions. And you look at Mossel Bay in the Western Cape and Mutatema in the northern part, the Limpopo province to be specific. Those are two different provinces in terms of climatic conditions. And we found that such technology performs so well in both conditions. So that is a sign that we do have technology that we can implement to complement the existing mechanical solutions when it comes to wastewater treatment. Therefore, incorporating such technologies will not only save the resources, but will also ensure ecological restoration of our scarce resources, as we are having dwindling water resources year after year. So when a resource recovers, its function starts to improve, and the community regain the associated benefits such as community gardens, stock farming, and general domestic water or wastewater use, depending on how you are able to treat this water. Of course, if there's an intention to use it for drinking purposes, you can complement this with a mechanical system and recycle this water. But definitely the community will be the biggest winner if such technology are incorporated into the system. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rembu. That's truly insightful, especially via the specific examples that you use regarding the algae to treat water that's currently embarking on at Mossel Bay, and then touching on what Dr. Quist currently mentioned regarding post-exposure and modeling approaches, which will lead me to a question that I would like to pose to both of you gentlemen, is that what role do government incentives play in encouraging the adoption of alternative water reuse technologies in mining? Perhaps, Dr. Quist, we can start with you.
Yeah, the water use licensing process from the Department of Water and Sanitation is probably the most important single driver for water use minimization and reuse, although most of the mining companies subscribe to the ESG goals and sustainable development. And we can definitely see that the pressure doesn't have to come from legislation anymore alone. There is an internal drive of most, especially bigger mining companies, to minimize impacts on the catchments and on the water cycle by maximizing reuse. It usually comes at a cost because you have to put in technologies such as belt filter presses that uses a lot of energy and is more expensive, or you have to implement water treatment that comes at a cost. But there's a higher level of understanding definitely in the past decade compared to prior to that. And again, that is being stimulated. Initially, you have to kickstart the process with legislation and enforcement, and then later on it becomes an internal driver.
And for you, Dr. Rebu, what is your thoughts regarding the role that government is playing regarding alternative water resources within mine water management?
I welcome this initiative from government, mainly for one reason. We are having very low technology uptake in all the sectors in the country. Even within the water sector itself, the technology uptake is very, very minimal. Technologies are being developed and shelved. So such initiatives will strongly encourage mining companies to adopt such well and tested technologies, which will then assist the companies to improve their operations without compromising their own profits. Because when you deal with mining sectors, this is a business where there is an intention to make profits in their operations. So when you take up technology without really making a provision for such technology uptake, it will really affect the bottom margin. So to compensate for that, government it's going to help significantly to provide such a buffer where the technology developers will find an opportunity to penetrate the mining sectors, while the mining companies are also not really being affected significantly in terms of their financials. So we believe that if this is implemented well, it will go a long way in terms of reducing the high volume of untreated acid mine drainage in the country.
Thank you so much for that. I'd like to then have another question for you, Dr. Quis, representing RTCM Consulting Services, in case you want to reach out to him. From your perspective, how can collaborative models with communities enhance catchment rehabilitation efforts? And what barriers for them to need to be overcome, in addition to what emerging treatment technologies do you see as most promising for aligning with the DSG regulations and ESG commitments outside what you have already touched on before? I mean, you made a key example of the technologies that are uptaking within Northern Cape regarding access water. So is there any other one that could model for communities to enhance the catchment rehabilitation efforts?
Yeah, I think a big part of that solution is that sometimes there is a barrier, between communities and mines. But if those barriers can be overcome, then there's really good opportunities to collaborate. An example I want to give is also in the Northern Cape. Not all our examples are in the Northern Cape, but the Northern Cape is really a stressed, water stressed area, and that's where we see the expression of the water pressure the most. So clearing of invasive alien plants that encroached across the whole of the agricultural sector in the past 50 years, especially post the 1974 to 1976 floods. These invasive plants significantly reduce surface runoff by up to 20%. Groundwater recharge in some areas is zero because of the in the incumbent capturing of groundwater recharge moisture that's on its way to the recharge. But there's clearing initiatives that have potential socio-economic benefits. If those could be implemented on a large scale, they use the plant products to create biochar, to create animal feeds these days using bioengineering and novel microbiological technologies, and at the same time basically restore the moisture in the soil and the runoff and the groundwater recharge. The Working for Water initiative has really worked well in areas where it was implemented a couple of years ago, and it would be great if those type of projects could be rolled out in areas like the Northern Cape and elsewhere where there's pressure on water resources. Mpumalanga is another area where alien invasive plants have got a big impact on water resources, and that's another area where it could be rolled out. And on top of that, integrated catchment approaches to educate farmers, mining operations, and communities alike on aspects like overgrazing and establishment of indigenous vegetation to curb erosion and maintain soil moisture.
Wow, that's really, really interesting. And I love the fact that you had highlighted Mpumalanga as well, because that is also another region that is water stricken, I would put it that way. And the upcoming technologies that are coming up on space are quite interesting, especially around the alien invasive plants and that technology coming up online. I would then like to move to you, Dr. Rembu. So within this 30-minute discussion, we've mentioned some key case studies that have been coming up at Mossel Bay in the Northern Cape and recently right now to Mpumalanga as well. In your opinion, how can partnerships between research institutions such as CSIR, government, and the mining companies accelerate the adoption of sustainable mine water solutions, especially under South Africa's current regulatory and funding landscape? What would be your thoughts regarding that?
A very important aspect in the research space is collaboration, because not a single entity is able to do everything by itself. I find that collaboration is very much important, especially when it comes to the adoption of sustainable mine water solution, which will definitely not happen automatically. We need to be intentional about addressing this problem, and all the role players need to be involved, not only government entities. Even private sector have got a very big role to play. That's one thing that I've seen, where when public entities came together and leave out the private sector, there is a big gap that is left. So when you have got all the role players understanding their role in the space, I can give an example of ourselves at CSIR, working very closely with the Council of Geoscience, Water Research Commission, Agricultural Research Council, and other private sector members, including my colleagues there, Dr. Quoth. Those companies have got so much to offer in the field of water sector. So I believe that if we are able to reduce the competition among ourselves, but find a room on how to complement each other's capability to address the challenge that we are faced with, it can really save the country the resources that we are having, because every financial year we are putting aside a budget and we are doing so little every financial year in a way that we are unable to start showing our results sooner. So as a result of results that are not being visible to the funders, it discourages the funders to continue putting more budget in that. Whereas if we are to work together and start showing the meaningful or some good results, the potential funders will see that there is value in investing in such initiatives. And that will go a long way in accelerating problem solving in the water space, and especially in the mining sector where so little has been done so far, especially where the old miners have left the mining activities simply because there is nothing more to mine. These areas make it very difficult for someone to come and take responsibility to restore or to treat whatever is the mine drainage that is associated with that area. So a collective is required to ensure that we deal with that old problem or the abandoned problem, because we can't leave it to the Department of Water and Sanitation to address it alone. They don't have the capability to develop the technology. They don't have the capability to do the research that the private sector and the research councils are able to do. So I strongly believe that government must ensure that there are regulations that are being enforced. As a country, we are very good in developing guidelines and regulations and policies. I will be lying if I said we don't have good policies in South Africa. We do have the best constitutions, but where we lack is the enforcement of those policies. We are very weak when it comes to the enforcement. There are a number of things that go unchecked simply because our enforcement are not so strong. Or when offenses are being committed, we are not seeing any repercussions to those who are committing such offenses. And that on itself, it encourages others to continue doing the wrong things. And that's why I'm saying, as a government, we really need to have a very good regulation and a policy or monitoring of our own regulations so that we are able to minimize the damage that we are causing to the environment by leaving such untreated water in those mines. Compliance monitoring in the mine should also consider technological applications or uptake of technology to reduce such environmental impact as a result of acid mine drainage. I believe that such a move can seriously foster investment to accelerate the adoption of sustainable solutions in the mining sector. But that should be linked directly with the incentives that we talked about earlier. If we are to have mass acceleration or mass technology uptake by the mining sector. Otherwise, it will remain just pep talk, or we will develop so many guidelines, regulations that are good in the piece of paper. But I think we need to measure our success by the implementations of those guidelines on the ground.
That's so interesting. And before we move towards the end of our three specific points, we will take one or two questions from the audience. I'm very curious to know what your thoughts are, Dr. Post, regarding this particular questions that we had just posed to Dr. Rainbow in terms of how can partnerships between research institutions, government, and mining companies accelerate the adoption of sustainable mine water solutions. I'm curious to understand your take, as mentioned by Dr. Rembo, in terms of your thoughts, in terms of how partnerships between research institutions can maintain or adopt sustainable mine water solutions.
Yeah, I think that's where entities like the CSIR, the Water Research Commission, and there's been a historical, very good partnership between mining operators, entities like the CSIR, the Department of Water and Sanitation, who used to do their own research, develop their own water-related databases. If we could bring those together in an effective form of corporate governance, that would be really ideal. On top of that, it would be great if legislation or water management principles required by the department would improve the level of education and training on the mine level. So it would really be good if the environmental manager that is based on the mine could be trained by these institutions to really understand the basics of the catchment approach, the water cycle, the mine water management, and the principles, what we find is, yes, these topics are discussed or actually lectured at university, but when the professional, the young professional enters the workforce, they do not always have the know-how to practically implement that. So my view is that there should be a step beyond university to assist these professionals to take that next step. And we've got a unique opportunity these days. Everybody is connected, so these could happen via, online courses, and it could happen not only in South Africa but into the rest of Africa as well.
Very interesting points. Before I move on to the last two questions, we actually have a question from the audience. And I think this was related to a point that you had mentioned earlier, this discussion, Dr. Kos, regarding pit lakes and the post-exposure modeling that they're adopting. So this is Anna Romotela. She's asking, during mine, and I'll put it up onto the screen, during mine closure, does the current mining legislation recommend pit lake as a sustainable closure method, or does it only recommend, or does only recommend backfilling of the open cast pits? A very technical question. Dr. Kos, would you mind if you perhaps answer that?
Yeah, that's a big question, right? So, from an environmental management principle approach, it would be ideal if all mining pits could be backfilled, right? Especially because evaporation exceeds precipitation in most areas of South Africa. Your pit lake would have like a drawdown because it acts as a sink, and you would accumulate mass, meaning you would deteriorate your water quality over time. It's not true for all mines. There's some mines, especially in the chrome and platinum industry, that about 5 years after mine closure, you would find the water quality in the pit lakes is very good, the drinking water quality. There's other mines where it's salinized and you get this deterioration of water quality aspect. And there, partial backfilling is an option. We've got mine pits where we've modeled the partial to optimize the partial backfilling so that you would contain the water flowing towards the pit lake during your average and below average rainfall months, but then you would flush it like in a 1 in 5 or a 1 in 10 year flood condition, so that your water quality would deteriorate and reset. So it's not a case of unfortunately, we cannot backfill all mining pits. Some of the mining pits, if you have to backfill it, then you would kill, the financial incentive to mine from the start. So yes, it's ideal to backfill, but in a number of cases that is not possible. But it doesn't mean that a sustainable post-closure water quality cannot be attained, especially if you have an opportunity to bring in surface water to flush the mine pit during flood conditions where the excess water would have ended up in the ocean anyway. I hope that answers the question.
I hope so too. It seemed to answer my curiosity as well. And I'm actually curious to know what the thoughts of Dr. Rainbow is regarding coming from a research institution, having the background within water and agriculture. I'm going to pop up the question again if you just have one or two thoughts around it. So during mine closure, does the current mining legislation recommend pit lake as a sustainable closure method, or does it only recommend backfilling of the open cast pits? Do you have any thoughts on that, Dr. Rainbow, by any chance?
There's no one fixed answer that we can recommend here.
Yeah.
But from scientific point of view, we will be guided by the quality of water that we are dealing with. So, because we will be concerned about the impact that it will have on the groundwater. So, in the interest of protecting groundwater quality, one will sway towards a backfilling, to say maybe if we do that, we will have a lesser impact on the groundwater. One, I mean, as my colleague already indicated, it's not always that such will have a bad impact on the groundwater. Some will provide good water quality. And hence, I'm thinking the starting point will be to assess the water quality that we're dealing with and then make a recommendation whether backfilling or pit lake will be an opportunity. But where you are dealing with very toxic chemicals, we wouldn't recommend pit lake. We would rather recommend backfilling to ensure that the impact on the groundwater is very, very minimal, because it's not always confined to that particular area. It can be spreading to other regions that are also sharing the same aquifer, which becomes very problematic. So there's no true or wrong question on this one, answer on this one. We just need to understand what quality are we dealing with, and then we take it from there.
Amazing. And I hope that answered your questions. Please feel free to reach out to us if you want to get in touch with our esteemed experts. I'm curious to know, and this is one last question before we close off. We have not really touched on financing. We've mentioned examples and the technology uptakes that are taking place within rehabilitation of projects, restoration area, and the impact within mine water on communities. Now, this is a question, if you have any thoughts on it, I'd like to pose to you both gentlemen, is that how can financing mechanisms, incentives, or return on investment models help mining companies justify investments in water rehabilitation in closed loop systems? Anybody could touch on that? Perhaps Dr. Post, if you can ask, do you have any thoughts on that or any knowledge?
Yeah, I think that's very important. We've been involved in a number of ESG reviews where banks would want to invest in the development of greenfields projects, and the review is then focused on the significance of the impacts of mining on the local and regional water resources, and whether there's sufficient provision made, for example, water treatment technologies or enhancement of existing water resources, for example, increasing well fields, enhancing water supply, putting in additional pipelines to surface water dams, refurbishing of sewage treatment works, rather using that water. So without the incentives driven from the finance perspective, the message would not arrive right at the front. And it's really important that all of the aspects we talk about, from mine, initiation, construction, operations, closure, post-closure, all of those impacts can be evaluated to a significant level of assurance to plan and budget for the latent post-closure risks. Saying that, it is really also important for new greenfields mines to start with the end in mind and really look at beyond closure. We talk about closure, but I would personally like to see most mining sites being regenerated into renewable energy hubs. You've got the electricity infrastructure already there. Most times you've got the water, you've got the community, and if that can happen, I think it's an example. The algae production and potential to grow animal feed, and vice versa, would be great if we can start with that, and if the financiers put that as a prerequisite up front, that could actually lower the mine closure liability.
That's very, very interesting. I would like to also get your thoughts on that, Dr. Ember. I mean, I'm sure you work very, very closely with all these entities, mining companies and solution providers that are within, the space. What would be your thoughts regarding, and I can just read the question to you again, is how can financing mechanisms, incentives, or ROI models help mining companies justify investments in water rehabilitation and closed loop systems? What would be your thoughts on that based on your experience?
I have seen a trend of ESG principles and also climate change and adaptations principles being part of the criteria for funding, especially for any projects that have got or that have got potential for environmental impact. So I think that is something that is positive. South African banks as well, they are starting to have units that are just focusing on sustainability or environmental sustainability, which is something that is positive because when such funders understand the impact of various developments on the environment, they are able to put that as a criteria for funding, and that becomes non-negotiable, so that whoever who got funding from the bankers, they will definitely make sure that they incorporate such principles that became the criteria for them to get such funding. And indirectly, they are contributing positively towards the restoration or rehabilitation of the land that they are degrading. So I think in short, as a country, we need to be very strong in terms of enforcing the regulations that we have. The banks are having all those regulations in place, and I think the banks are leading in this regard in terms of enforcing the principles that they put when they when they are approving the funding. But we need to see the same from the government perspective in terms of holding the mining companies, in terms of complying with all those permit conditions. So if we do that, we might see something positive coming out of this whole exercise. As the funders, sometimes you would really want to see that where you are investing, there is minimal environmental degradation associated with the funding that you are putting forward. Because it has got a reputational risk when you are funding a project that is not benefiting the community at all, or that is making life of the communities very, very miserable. So I would say that such criteria needs to be a standard across all the fundings that are associated with environmental projects. We have already started seeing the trend, as I indicated, but not everyone is doing that.
That's very, very interesting. Well, gentlemen, it seems like we've come to a slight close towards our discussion. I would love to leave one question out. I would appreciate both of you to respond to regarding our audience. A very future looking sort of question is looking ahead, what regulatory or ESG alignment strategies should mining companies prioritize to ensure sustainable mine water management over the next 5 years? Perhaps I could start over with you, Gus. I know you've touched on some of the ESG uptakes that's coming up in the space. So, in terms of looking into the future in the next 5 years, which would be the most sustainable ESG methods that mine water companies can adopt?
Yeah, so I think one of the important aspects that, in my view, should be focused on is in many cases you've got, let's say, 20 or 30 mining companies operating in the same catchment, and each entity focuses on their own EIA and their own water use license and their own water balance. But to then expand that to a catchment level or beyond a catchment level, to create regional solutions, because often if you have an impact that is 30% here and 20% there, if you add them up, we know about the importance of cumulative impacts. However, when we get onto the ground, that is not really receiving a lot of attention if you consider the water use license and the mining right application process, it's very much focused on properties. And if we could get actually mining to, take the initiative to create these integrated solutions, much analogous to a strategic environmental assessment, but focusing on water, I think that would be the future. And collaboration across boundaries. In some instances, one mine has got surplus water, the other one needs water. They could trade the water, and otherwise the one has to evaporate the water and the other one has to develop more for water resources. Those type of approaches, I think, in my view, and on top of that is, the electronic databases that's available. Again, I'm going to cite the Tseping Water Users Association, where we've been involved with many years, establishing an online water database where more than 20 mines and a number of farmers share the water level data, the rainfall data, and through getting access to a regional context, it was possible to identify, better water management strategies. So I really think, integrating data and focusing on catchment approaches, it's in the legislation for many years. Integrated environmental management, integrated catchment management, those principles are well known, but when it gets to the ground, it's not always, the collaboration is lacking. So I think that would be a great way to move forward on regional water management strategies.
Very, very interesting, Dr. Quest. Thank you so much for that. I'd love to also pose and get thoughts from Dr. Rembu. I know that within his work, the integrating data is very, very fundamental, and I'm sure he also mentioned that as one of sort of the uptake of methodologies within the ESG regulations. So, posing the same question to you, Dr. Rembu, just reiterating again for the audience. Looking ahead, what regulatory or ESG alignment strategies should mining companies prioritize to ensure sustainable mine water management over the next 5 years, in addition towards what Dr. Kos has just mentioned right now?
I would say mining companies should prioritize ESG strategies that addresses both compliance and stakeholder expectations. Balancing both sustainability with profitability will really get both the mining companies and also the communities in one room and agree on what they wanted to do with their space. Because mining sectors are not happening in isolation, they are happening within the community space. So such mining activities in most areas have been seen as benefiting only the few. So we need to start having such honest and open discussion with the community so that they understand what are the real impact in their livelihood as well. So if that is done, the companies must prioritize such interaction to minimize ecological and socio-economic impact. Because when we only stick to the tick box exercise where we've got this checklist to say the company have complied with that and that and that, without really involving everyone on board, there are always challenges at the end. And most of the time we see challenges when it's time to close down those mines. We have seen that water scarcity and habitat destruction are major risks in most of those mining areas. Therefore, such mining companies should adopt water reuse technologies and also biodiversity conservation principles to mitigate potential environmental harms. I think if we go that route, we will be able to safeguard most of the benefits associated with the mining areas. And everyone will likely be happy. The stakeholder will be happy because they were involved and they know what it's in for them. If they end up getting what they've been promised, they will be happy while the mining companies are making profits. And as the general communities, we get more tax. So I think there is an opportunity for us to make this work for all of us.
I believe so too. Well, we've come to the end of our conversation. Thank you so much, gentlemen. So many key items came out of this discussion. We touched on ESG principles being criteria for funding. That was really an interesting point that I think the audience would be very interested to know about. SA banks are starting to have units for sustainability, which means that there is a growing importance regarding sustainability within the mine water range and obviously finding opportunities that are coming up online. We touched on education and training at mine water level, which obviously will be important regarding the uptake of ESG principles and alignments that are coming up onto the space, yielding the mining companies as well. We touched on the basics of catchment approach, nature-based solutions, as Dr. Rimbu had mentioned, such as restoring moisture within the soil. That's very, very imperative as well. While we have really made a really good case studies that both Dr. Kos and Dr. Rimbu had mentioned regarding the uptake of technologies such as pit to lakes, post-exposure, and modeling approaches that are coming up online. And obviously the very important aspect of integrating data, which is very, very important. So I want to thank you so much, gentlemen, for that really, really insightful talk. I think the audience really benefit from it. I want to thank the audience as well for the questions that you gave us, which is really, really impactful. So yes, guys, that's coming to a close. This is a closing. On behalf of Water Security Africa, Inlet, and ESI Africa, we would like to thank our guest speakers and our viewers from today's discussion. Please note that this recording will be made available live on demand in a few days' time, so it will be in your inbox. You'll receive an email with an instruction on how to access the recording. Another reminder is that we will be hosting the Johannesburg edition of Water Security Africa from the 4th to the 5th of November in Sanitation, Johannesburg. We are so excited for it. We've got an incredible speaker lineup that's coming on board, really the big players that are in the CNI space for large water intensive users. So if you're interested in attending or speaking, please feel free to contact us at VUCA. Other than that, thank you so much, gentlemen. Have a lovely afternoon. And ladies and gentlemen, have a lovely afternoon, Father. See you in Johannesburg.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.